What is up, everybody? This is JeffElJefe, and I wanted to walk you through some of the settings that I use with our optimizer to make the most of our projections and to get the biggest advantages out of the correlations that I like, and to avoid some groupings that I just don't want to have a part of my lineups. I'm someone that's going to take on more unconventional groupings and lineup styles than a lot of the people that take the time to actually think about those things. But I'll show you, give you the tools to be able to build things however you want. You'll see how much control that you have with this optimizer, more than you probably realize, if even if you've been playing around with our optimizer quite a bit. So I'm using a Showdown slate as the example here. This is the matchup between the Falcons and the Carolina Panthers. And if you're watching this the day of the game, this is going to be extremely useful. If you're watching this after this game has already happened, you're still going to get plenty out of this, because what I mainly want to cover here is the general types of settings that you would want to use and how you can use certain features in the optimizer to take advantage of things. And my first tip for anyone that's going to try to do an MME build for a Showdown slate, for any slate for that matter, is to just narrow down your pool. So what I did is, of course, removed all the guys with zeros who aren't going to pop up anyway, but just to be safe and just to get them out of the way, you know, they grade them out and remove them so that you don't even have to look at them. And then for the captain, I do that as well. For the captain, the way I narrow down my pool is I go through and I figure out, well, which of these guys have the most upside. If they don't have a lot of upside, then I don't want them typically. And I've gone and I've created a cheat sheet on NumberBall.com for subscribers, so you can see in certain situations why you might want to use a defense or a kicker as your captain, even though typically most of the time you're not going to want to do that, or why you would want to use a wide receiver, and who you would look to pair with your wide receiver, all those sorts of things. Bunch of tips. If you haven't seen it yet, go on numberball.com, NFL, in the strategy section. You'll see my cheat sheet that basically tells you, okay, here's the optimal roster construction you want between 1 and 2 quarterbacks, 1 and 2 running backs, 2 or 3 receiver, whatever. Got that all laid out for people. And then, all right, you want 4 from this team, 2 from this team, you know, all those sorts of things. But typically you're not going to want kickers and defenses as your captain, because you've got to think of everything as raw points upside, but especially at the captain spot, you want to be able to hit a high raw point ceiling. Raw points meaning I'm not thinking about point per dollar. I'm just thinking about the exact point total. I want the guy to have the upside to be able to be the top overall scorer on the slate, regardless of what the salary is. So you've got your guys like your tight ends. Again, like refer to the cheat sheet on numberball.com, but generally you're not going to want a tight end as your captain. There are certain scenarios where I think it's fine. On this slate, I don't think that that's one of those times. So I don't have them as an option to be the captain right here. Where I start to get into some captains, you're pretty much always, if you're using multiple captains, going to be using a wide receiver in that captain pool, at least one. But that's the bulk of where my captain exposure usually comes from. So I've got the guys that I think have the upside to put up the most points on the slate today out of all the positions. Curtis Samuel, who's borderline there, but I do think he does. Especially I like the uniqueness that he creates with the stacking, which we'll get into in a little bit, but no one's going to deny that Julio, Calvin, DJ Moore, I think is in that category as well. And of course, Robbie Anderson, those guys would have the upside to lead this slate in scoring, the single game slate in scoring. And then I've got the 2 starting running backs. Again, I don't think I'll get any arguments there, but I removed these backup running backs who are expected to get touches and have a chance at a touchdown or something, but they hit their upside. It's the Taysom Hill argument, right? Like people say, man, Taysom Hill's so cheap, you got to play Taysom Hill. It's like, well, when Taysom Hill's upside is a touchdown and you're fading, if he's 10-15% owned like he is every time he's on a showdown slate. Now, you wouldn't play any of these running backs that are 10-15% owned probably. Look, we're projecting 8% owned for the highest of these backup running backs. Your upside as a touchdown, like I'll be on the side that is fading that touchdown, because even if he gets the touchdown, you're probably going to need a little bit more than that to be in the optimal lineup. Even if you are super cheap, there's a chance you can make it, but there's no chance that you're going to be a captain, like that you can be the captain in an optimal lineup. And it just doesn't make sense. If you're going to use these guys that don't have much of a role, you don't want them to be really popular. Under 10%, perfect for these guys. I'll talk about some ways that you can protect against having too many of guys like this that can lower your overall ceiling in your lineup. But it's okay to have one or two of these guys in there. But Mike Davis, Todd Gurley clearly have upside, raw point upside, and then quarterback's always going to have raw point upside, and even the worst quarterbacks, the Sam Darnolds, apologies to Jets fans, the Dwayne Haskins, the Daniel Joneses, the Drew Locks, the offending a lot of fan bases right now. But you know what I mean? The bottom of the barrel quarterbacks are still going to have the upside to lead a single game in scoring. Shouldn't be a question. The next thing that I like to look at is to create some groups. So the groups that the control that we're able to use with our groups is awesome. I'll start with just the most simple one, a group that you would create to use some correlation, which correlation, again, refer to my cheat sheet, point out that it's not like the end all be all, like you have to only use correlated plays. That's how it's like, here's your objective for showdown slates more than any other form of DFS that I can think of right now. You want to focus on uniqueness. And we talk about uniqueness, being contrarian, and that sort of stuff in normal GPPs on main slates. But it's just so much more exaggerated on these showdowns because you're going to run into so many duplicate lineups if you're not careful. So it's almost more important. I think it is more important. It's arguably as important at the very least, though, that you focus on uniqueness more so than what is this lineup going to project. Like, what's the probability that this lineup is going to be the winning lineup? Like, that isn't even the most important thing. The most important thing is my lineup likely to be unique or very lightly duplicated? If it's a huge contest where you can't avoid duplication, it's like, all right, well, let me get the least duplication possible with some still good lineups. So those are your two big things, your two main focuses. Let me try to create unique lineups that aren't duplicated. And also let me create lineups that have a decent chance of winning. The way we can correlate and increase our chances of winning is the grouping that everyone knows about is like a quarterback to wide receiver pairing. There are a couple ways to do this. One, there are two ways we're playing Teddy Bridgewater. We're playing him in the flex, which is what this is controlling over here, this key right here, the controls group over here. And then we're playing him as the captain, which you hit this key to control his captain group. But if you want to create a Teddy Bridgewater group, you just click next to his name here. And I've already created my groups, and I'll walk you through them so you can see them. Teddy Bridgewater, and keep in mind, this is early in the day. I haven't even looked at Justin's probabilities where he runs 10,000 sims, tells you, all right, this is the probability that the Teddy Bridgewater is going to end up in a captain spot. This is a probability Teddy Bridgewater is going to end up as a flex. I haven't looked at that yet. So these are just kind of general ideas. This is about where I'm guessing my groups and my exposures, that sort of thing, where they're going to land. Teddy Bridgewater, I've got a group here where I created. I typed in all these names here of guys that I would like him to be paired with, and I want at least one of these guys. I'm not limiting myself to just one, though. If I wanted to do that, I have the ability to. I can do, say it's a quarterback that has a lot more mobility, which maybe you think Bridgewater's a mobile quarterback. I don't really think he is, but if you thought that, well, Teddy Bridgewater's going to run one in and he's going to run for 60 plus yards, okay, then maybe you don't even want any receivers at all, because you think, well, everyone's going to pair Teddy Bridgewater with a receiver, and I think he's going to get it all on the ground. Then you can say, okay, exactly 0 of these guys. And you're going to have a bunch of unique lineups that have Teddy Bridgewater in there, but no other receivers. And that wouldn't be optimal, I wouldn't think. But you have the ability to do that if you thought that that was the right decision based on ownership or whatever narrative that you've created to convince yourself that that's the right way to go. But what I have is use at least one of these guys. It means exactly what it sounds like, but you can use a combination too. All right, I want between 1 and 2. Like, I don't want to get up to 3. And that's, I mean, honestly, that's probably a better thing to do, because you don't necessarily want like 4 Teddy Bridgewater and 4 receivers and then one random guy on the other team on the Falcons. It's not a bad idea to cap it at 3 for right now, because this isn't the only group I'm creating or anything too. I've got it set at use at least 1. And I'll show you how we get there too, where I'm expecting to control some more styles of more types of players that are going to be in Teddy Bridgewater lineups. So I've got Teddy Bridgewater there. Perfect. I've got all these other groups too. You know, I've got my Matt Ryan group where I've got some receivers listed here. Of course, we see inactives, and I'll probably be typing a couple other names in there. I'm sure Zacchaeus will get in there, maybe, whatever. You get your group of guys that you'd be cool with Matt Ryan being paired with, because if Matt Ryan does well, how does he not have at least one of his receivers do well? That's an obvious correlation. The problem is with correlations in Showdown that there's not enough content done on right now is that there's not necessarily an edge in it, because there's your ownership of certain correlations versus the probability of that correlation ending up in the optimal lineup. And if the amount of people using that correlation is higher than the probability, then there is no edge there. It's almost better to not use it. If it's close, it's still about better to use it, to side with the correlation, but I won't avoid certain things because of negative correlation, specifically because everyone avoids them. There's examples in the cheat sheet on NumberBall that I give there, where it's like, this is my favorite way to take advantage of people's bias towards correlation, where the probability is actually I mean, it's still not great, right? It's like, okay, it's 3%, but only 1% of people, only 1% of lineups have this type of lineup. So I've created an edge for myself there. It's not the most likely thing to happen, but it doesn't matter if I can if I can leverage that ownership in my favor. So anyway, we've got this here created where Matt Ryan now is using at least one of these guys. Cool. This is really simple, easy stuff. A lot of optimizers have these sorts of things. Now let's get into, well, what happens if Teddy Bridgewater is the captain? You click this and you can come into a whole new group. And again, I've already created this. So let's go over here. So now I've got where Teddy Bridgewater is a captain. I'm using at least 2 guys, because this is a scenario where Teddy Bridgewater is hitting his ceiling. And if Teddy Bridgewater is hitting his ceiling, and again, I'm of the assumption he's not going to get it on the ground. You know, there may be some people that believe that. If he's hitting his ceiling, he's throwing for multiple touchdowns. If he's throwing for multiple touchdowns, there's at least 1 or 2 receivers that are going to be coming towards their ceilings, or at least to the point where they would be in the optimal lineup, at least paying off their salary or so. And so I've got it at least 2 of the receivers, plus I've got Matt Ryan as an option, so that some of these lineups are going to have 2 receivers for Teddy Bridgewater, And then the other other option that I'm giving the optimizer, which again, it's like, let's give the projections the power. Like, it's not limit everything that the projections have put out and just create all of these rules that don't give any freedom. Let's give it some freedom to put Matt Ryan in there and think about the rules we've already created. If Matt Ryan is in our lineup as a flex, then we've also created a rule for Matt Ryan where he's going to have a pass catcher. So now we've created rules essentially where Teddy Bridgewater, when he's a captain, is either going to be in a double stack with Matt Ryan, one of Matt Ryan's receivers, and one of Teddy Bridgewater's receivers with 2 open spots for plenty of flexibility, or he's going to have 2 of his own receivers. And I think that that's a really good way to capitalize on Teddy Bridgewater's upside, because we're capturing upside with the Matt Ryan side of things. If this just turns into a shootout, and it gives, I think, a little bit of variability within your lineups where you don't have to have just a bunch of double stacks with Teddy Bridgewater as a captain. You've got some lineups where he's paired with 1 wide receiver. And we can get into giving the projections a little bit more freedom in a way as well with the key boosts here. But I'm going to save that for another video. That'll be posted with the cheat sheet, because that's a little more advanced stuff where we can start to say, all right, well, if Bridgewater is in the lineup as the captain, then Robbie Anderson gets this boost, Matt Ryan gets this boost, and you could sort of control it that way to where you're not forcing in guys necessarily, but you are giving an advantage to the guys that it would make more sense, that would correlate more with Teddy Bridgewater. Yeah, at the same time, like if you're boosting a projection by 10%, it's not going to ignore another option that is projected higher raw points just because of the correlation. It's not going to ignore those guys. You're going to get a little more variation again in your lineups, a little more uniqueness, I think, because not a lot of people are building that sort of freedom in their lineups. They are creating hard and fast rules, and I like to try and stay away from the hard and fast rules and give my optimizer, our projections, a little more freedom, because I want to land on some randoms. I don't want to land on all random lineups, but I want to land on some stuff that wouldn't make sense to certain people. Like people wondering, well, how did you end up with a defense as your captain and 4 guys from the other team, whatever? It's like, well, because I didn't just handcuff my optimizer, my projections. I let the projections do some of the work and pop in some of the raw points rather than just emphasizing only correlation. Like, correlation is cool. Correlation means something, but versus a raw point projection, like there's a trade-off there. You're trading raw points for correlation, which often makes sense, doesn't always. What else can we talk about here before moving on? Let's see. All right, so let's talk about a couple other things that get into more advanced type stuff. But one is that it doesn't have to be just these quarterback to wide receiver stacks. It's just like the most obvious stacks. In Showdown, you want to be thinking a little more outside the box. You want to be thinking about, okay, if this situation happens where I've got this guy as a captain, or this group of players that are going to be in my lineup, like what do I want or not want my lineup, and create groups that way. So an example of that is, all right, if a defense ends up in my lineup, what's the rest of my lineup likely to look like if that's going to be the winner? Probably not a bunch of like other really low scoring guys. It's probably going to have some high scoring guys, right? So, and I mean, I think what some people do is like they'll say, I don't want 2 defenses in the same lineup or 2 kickers in the same lineup. And I think I even have that rule in here for this slate. I don't always have that, but I think I do for this slate. Yeah, so like Joey Sly, with Joey Sly in the lineup, exactly 0 of Young Ho Koo. So that's saying it's one or the other, right? I don't need both kickers in my lineup. That makes sense because you still got to win in raw points. You can't have a bunch of these cheap guys that their upside is what, realistically 15 points, somewhere in the teens or so. Very rarely going to get in the 20s. Half of your lineup spots are usually going to be guys that are scoring close to 20 points. It's certainly usually more than 15 points. So you probably don't want a bunch of guys paired that are cheap with Joey Sly. You just maybe want one or two of those guys. And I have a group in here that that limits these guys that you don't mind having in your lineup, but that you don't want to go crazy on. I've got Sly in there, the kickers, right? I've got the defenses. I've got some of the backup running backs, some of the receivers that aren't expecting to get much work, but could catch a touchdown or something. And this is just, again, before even seeing inactives or anything, and a list that's likely to be changed quite a bit. But I'm saying I want at most two of these guys in the same lineup. I don't think it'd be crazy to say I want at most one of these guys. That's just as likely to be the rule that I use. But you don't want a bunch of these guys in the same lineup. It's fine to have a decent spread of these guys across your lineups. If you think that they have a decent chance of scoring 10 points or so, or close to 10 points if they're really cheap, you can't go crazy on them. And it's easy when you're building 150 lineups to put all your exposures out there and not create a group like that and miss it in just your 150 lineups, miss the fact that you had lineups like that were bad, that weren't good, that had no chance of winning. That's why there potentially is a decent edge in Showdown. Of course, I mean, easy for me to say I won 50K on a slate a few weeks ago, maybe more like a month ago. I don't know. So it's like I'm off to a hot start, and it seems easy. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. It's the first time I've taken Showdown seriously at all. Last year, I made a decent amount of money. I think I made 30K on Showdowns last year, but not even like researching or anything, not doing MME builds like this. But maybe I did it once. I don't know, but never like studying it and worried about groups and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Showdown seems like there's a pretty decent edge. We'll see how that all plays out. But I think that's it for now. Like I said, I've got a cheat sheet that goes over some different rules that you'll want to focus on when it makes sense to use tight end as a captain, or kicker, defense, some of those lesser known ones. What you should think about when your wide receiver is a captain, if it's a high scoring game or a low scoring game, what that means, what your lineup should look like in those circumstances. When you should focus on, I'll give this one out. So I talked about uniqueness being a big focus, and it's you can do it with groups and potentially say, okay, let me identify some of these lower owned guys that I like, whether it be Brian Hill, like he's 7% owned. So I got, okay, one of him. I've got Ian Thomas, he's going to be pretty low owned. Like maybe let me identify 4 guys under 20%, create a group. I'm going to use at least maybe 6 guys is what I'll identify. Use at least 2 of those guys in every lineup. And then all of a sudden, pretty much every lineup I have is contrarian. That is, I think, a little bit of a lazier way to do it. We also have the ability here too, where you can cap by the max public own, the projected ownership here. And you can say, all right, well, I don't want the cumulative ownership to be more than 150%. Around 150, 200%, that's a decent range for you to consider. You're going to avoid a decent amount of dupes at that range. Yeah, I mean, if it's under 100%, you're going to do a real good job of avoiding dupes. But again, it's a 2-part thing. Like, you still want to be able to build lineups that you think have a good shot at winning. So that's why when you build all these lineups, you go through and look at them and go one by one and say, okay, do I have 3 ugly players in here that this lineup doesn't have a chance to win? Do I have correlation that I want? Do I have the ownership that makes sense? All those sorts of things. But yeah, I think that's one way to focus on ownership. The other way, the shortcut way that I think is really effective, is just use cap space. That was a really long-winded way to get to the point that this was the point I was trying to make, is you can tell the optimizer leave, I'd say at least 300, but in reality, like if you want to be aggressive like me, like you're leaving sometimes 1,000 or more in your builds, and so sometimes not even playing a single lineup that has 1,000 or less of cap space left. It's just a bunch of guaranteed, not guaranteed, but highly likely to be unique lineups. And you're going to win less often that way, but when you win, you are very rarely going to be duplicate, like in this long train of lineups that tie. You'll maybe be tied with a few guys. So when I won, for the people that don't know the story from when I won the 50K in the Showdown, I entered in the smaller contest. In hindsight, stupidly, I thought that I was being smart and like responsible and stuff. Again, hadn't thought much about showdowns till this season. Then later, and even at the time, I was questioning, like, is this the right thing to do? Should I enter the smaller contest, the more winnable contest? Considering my focus was on being so unique, it was the wrong decision. I shouldn't have done that. I should have gone and entered the bigger contest, even though at a lower probability of winning it. It makes more sense when my lineup's going to be unique, that I'm going to make more money. And sure enough, I built the winning lineup in both contests, but I didn't enter it in the big one. So it cost me a couple $100,000 at least by not entering it in the right contest. But if I had entered it in the big one, I would have been tied with two other players. So it would have been duplication, but talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars being paid out still between all three winners. And it's avoiding the duplication is key. If you end up on a chalk lineup where it's like, number one, don't ever enter. I don't care how good you think the lineup is. Don't ever enter like this zeroed out lineup with no cap space left over in Showdown. I mean, I think that that's impossible to be unique. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's some unique build out there where it's like, oh well, yeah, I used this kicker and the captain and it freed up I don't know, but I think it's a bad idea to play zeroed out lineups in Showdown. But all that to say that really focus on trying to be unique, as well as trying to project for an optimal lineup, a good chance at taking the tournament down. So I think that's it for now. Hopefully all of this was helpful. I know it kind of jumped around a little bit, but if you want some more concise, organized thoughts, check out the cheat sheets, nice bullet points and organized, and subtitles and all that kind of stuff like I usually do. Appreciate you tuning in. Catch you next time. Till then, do awesome things.